The market was already crowded when Chloe arrived that Saturday morning. Cars struggled to find parking. Motorbikes squeezed between them, honking. The smell of fresh pepper and fried plantain filled the air, mixing with the sound of hawkers calling out prices. Chloe stepped out of her car and adjusted the strap of her handbag. She was wearing a green dress that fit her perfectly, the kind of dress people noticed. Her shoes clicked against the ground as she walked, and a few traders turned their heads when she passed. She liked that. She had always liked being noticed. She had come to buy groceries for the week: tomatoes, onions, rice, and fish for the soup her husband loved. Her list was in her phone, but she barely looked at it. She knew this market well. She had been shopping here for years, ever since she got married and moved into the neighborhood. She walked past the fruit sellers, past the woman who sold spices in small nylon bags, past two boys carrying a bucket of water on a wooden stick between them. Everyone greeted her. She nodded back without really looking at anyone. Then she reached a small stall near the end of the row, one she hadn't noticed before. An old woman sat behind a wooden table, her back straight despite the heat. Her dress had faded from too many washes and the hem was frayed at the bottom. Her sandals were worn thin, the strap on one of them held together with a knot. In front of her, arranged in neat rows, were small handmade bags, some with beads sewn along the edges, some plain, all of them clearly made by hand, stitched by careful stitch. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, sat on a stool beside her, fanning himself with a piece of cardboard. The woman looked up when Chloe slowed her steps. "Madame, please buy one," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I made them myself." Chloe stopped. She picked up one of the bags, a brown one with small white beads along the strap, and turned it over in her hands. "How much?" 2,000 naira each. Chloe's eyebrows lifted. She looked at the bag again, then set it back down on the table, a little harder than she needed to. 2,000 for this? "I spent many hours making them," the woman said. "Each one takes almost a full day." Chloe laughed, a short laugh with no warmth in it. "You people in this market will put any price on something and expect people to pay it." The woman's shoulders dropped slightly. She looked down at the bags in front of her, as though she were checking to see if she had done something wrong with them. "I can reduce the price for you," she said. "How much can you pay?" "I don't want it," Chloe said, already turning to walk away. The woman hesitated. Then quietly she said, "Please, madame, even if you don't buy, don't insult what someone worked hard to make." Chloe stopped walking. She turned around slowly, her eyes narrowing. "What did you see?"
The old woman's face changed. She had not meant it as a challenge, only as a plea, but she could see now that it had landed differently. "I didn't mean to offend you," she said quickly. "I only meant, you're sitting here in these dirty clothes, selling bags nobody wants, and you're lecturing me?" Chloe's voice rose, and a few people nearby stopped what they were doing to look. The old woman said nothing. Her hands, resting on the table, trembled slightly. "Look at yourself first," Chloe said, "before talking to people like that." The market around them had gone quieter. A woman selling tomatoes 2 stalls down had stopped mid-sentence with a customer. A man carrying a crate of eggs slowed his steps to watch. The old woman lowered her head. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply looked down at her hands. The young boy beside her stood up. His fists were clenched at his sides, and his voice cracked slightly when he spoke. "Leave her alone," he said. Chloe looked at him, surprised that a child would speak to her that way. "Mind your business," she snapped. She picked up her handbag from where she had rested it on the edge of the table, turned, and walked off into the crowd, her shoes clicking against the ground the same way they had when she arrived, though this time a little faster. She didn't look back. If she had, she might have seen the old woman wipe her eyes with the back of her hand, and the boy sit back beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. She also didn't see the woman standing across the market, near the entrance, who had watched the entire exchange from a distance. That woman wore simple clothes too, and she said nothing. She only watched, her expression unreadable, before turning and walking toward a car that was waiting for her, a car far nicer than anything in that part of the market. Chloe finished her shopping without noticing any of this. She paid for her tomatoes, her rice, her fish, and drove home thinking about what she would cook, not about what she had said. She had no idea that a decision made in a few careless seconds was about to follow her home.
3 days later, Chloe was in the kitchen when her phone rang. It was her husband, David. "Chloe, did you hear about the new foundation that opened in the city?" "No, why?" They are giving grants to small business owners. Real money, not loans. My colleague applied and said the process is serious. They are not playing around. Chloe wiped her hands on a towel and sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly interested. She had been thinking about starting a small clothing business for over a year, but she never had the capital to begin properly. Who's behind it? The woman behind the foundation is apparently very wealthy. She's been helping struggling traders, widows, young entrepreneurs, anyone trying to build something from nothing. What's her name? There was a short pause on the line, as though David was reading it off something. Mrs. Margaret Williams. Chloe felt something strange, a small tug of familiarity, though she couldn't place why. She had never met anyone by that name. Still, something about it sat uneasily in her chest. "Are you okay?" David asked. "I'm fine," Chloe said, just thinking.
The following week, David told her about an event, a business gathering where Mrs. Williams was expected to speak. Local entrepreneurs, government officials, and people hoping to be considered for the foundation's grants would all be there. "You should come," David said. "It might be good for you. You never know who you meet." Chloe agreed, mostly out of curiosity. The hall was large, filled with round tables covered in white cloth, and by the time they arrived, most of the seats were already taken. Chloe sat beside David near the middle of the room, straightening her dress, glancing around at the other guests. A host walked onto the stage and tapped the microphone twice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder of the Williams Community Foundation, Mrs. Margaret Williams." The room erupted into applause. Chloe clapped along, half distracted, looking towards the stage out of habit more than interest. Then a woman walked out from behind the curtain, and Chloe's hands slowed, then stopped completely. The faded dress was gone. The worn sandals were gone. In their place, Mrs. Williams wore a simple, elegant outfit, nothing flashy, but the kind of clothing that carried itself with quiet confidence. She walked to the microphone the way someone walks when they've stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. Chloe stared, her mouth slightly open. "That can't be her," she whispered. David glanced at her. "Do you know her?" Chloe didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the stage, on the face she had seen only 3 days earlier, bent low over a wooden table covered in handmade bags.
Mrs. Williams adjusted the microphone and began to speak, her voice calm and clear. "I grew up with very little," she said. "There was a time when I sold handmade bags in the market just to survive. I made every single one with my own hands, sitting under the sun for hours, hoping someone would stop long enough to notice the work that went into them." Chloe's face went pale. She gripped the edge of the table. "I was laughed at many times," Mrs. Williams continued. "People looked at my clothes and assumed they already knew everything about me. They assumed my worth could be measured by the state of my sandals." The words moved through the room gently, but for Chloe, they landed like something physical. She heard her own voice again, as clearly as if she had said it seconds ago. "Look at yourself first before talking to people." She pressed a hand to her mouth. "But those experiences taught me something important," Mrs. Williams said. "Poverty can change a person's circumstances. It does not determine their value." The audience applauded warmly. Chloe's hand stayed in her lap. She felt David glance at her again, but she couldn't bring herself to look at him. Mrs. Williams continued speaking, describing the foundation's mission, the years she had spent building her business from nothing, and the promise she had made to herself once she succeeded, that she would never forget where she came from, and she would never let another struggling person feel invisible.
Then she announced that the foundation would be giving business grants to 20 women that evening, women who had applied and been quietly selected in the weeks before. "The first name I'll call," Mrs. Williams said, looking down at a card in her hand, "is Chloe Anderson." Chloe's heart seemed to stop entirely. Her eyes went wide. Around her, people turned to see who would stand. "That's you," David said, nudging her gently. "Chloe, that's you." She hadn't applied, she didn't understand, but her legs moved before her mind caught up, and she rose slowly from her chair, her whole body trembling as she made her way towards the stage. When she reached Mrs. Williams, she found she couldn't lift her eyes. Mrs. Williams smiled at her, warm and unreadable. "Welcome, Chloe." Chloe's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Why did you choose me?" Mrs. Williams looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because everyone deserves a second chance." Tears filled Chloe's eyes, but Mrs. Williams wasn't finished. She reached into a bag resting near her feet and pulled out a small handmade bag, brown, with white beads sewn along the strap. Chloe recognized it instantly. "I made this myself," Mrs. Williams said, holding it out to her. Chloe stared at it without moving. "Keep it," Mrs. Williams said gently. "Why?" Chloe managed to ask. "Whenever you see it, remember that you should never judge someone's worth by what they are wearing." Chloe took the bag with shaking hands, and standing there in front of everyone, she broke down in tears.
After the event ended, Chloe waited near the entrance of the hall, watching the crowd thin out as guests said their goodbyes and made their way to the parking lot. She told David she needed a few minutes, and he nodded, understanding without needing an explanation. She saw Mrs. Williams walking toward a car parked near the front, a folder tucked under her arm. "Mrs. Williams," Chloe called out. The older woman stopped and turned. Chloe walked toward her slowly, the handmade bag still clutched in her hand. "I owe you an apology," she said. Mrs. Williams said nothing. She simply waited, her expression calm. "I was cruel to you that day at the market," Chloe continued, her voice shaking. "I judged you because of your clothes. I embarrassed you in front of everyone, and I am ashamed of myself." Mrs. Williams studied her for a moment. "Do you know what hurt me most that day?" she asked. Chloe shook her head. "You didn't hurt me because you thought I was poor," Mrs. Williams said. "People assume things about strangers all the time. That alone I could forgive easily." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "You hurt me because you believed being poor made me less of a person, that my voice didn't deserve to be heard, simply because of what I was wearing."
Chloe lowered her head, unable to meet her eyes. "I know," she said. "I know that now." Mrs. Williams sighed, not with anger, but with something closer to weariness. "I could have refused to help you today," she said. "I saw your name on the list before the event. I could have crossed it off without a second thought." Chloe looked up. "Then why didn't you?" Mrs. Williams smiled gently, the kind of smile that came from someone who had thought about the question long before Chloe ever asked it. "Because kindness shouldn't depend on how someone treated you yesterday." Chloe's eyes filled with tears again, and this time she didn't try to hide them. Mrs. Williams stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Learn from what happened," she said. "That's all I ask." "I will," Chloe said. "I promise I will." "And when you see someone struggling," Mrs. Williams added, "don't ask yourself what they can give you." She smiled again, softer this time. "Ask yourself what you can give them." They stood there for a moment longer, neither of them saying anything else. Then Mrs. Williams squeezed her shoulder once and walked toward her car, leaving Chloe standing alone under the evening light, holding a small handmade bag in both hands.